Hey, Sarah Mackenzie here, and I've got something special for you today. Last week, I did a couple of live workshops, in fact, on 3 steps to a fairy tale summer. What 3 steps can you do to make sure that you end the summer not feeling like exhausted from overscheduling and trying to overdo and make sure nothing gets lost in the summer slide and all that anxiety. And also maybe not going the other way where you kind of just let everything go. I've done both of these where the whole summer it's like nobody's doing chores, nobody's getting up at a reasonable time. The summer starts to feel blah. What's something in between those 2 extremes that we can do? Something that doesn't add a lot to our to-do list and that helps us focus on what matters most. I've got an idea for you. It's a fairy tale summer. We're reading fairy tales together. So I did a couple live workshops on 3 steps that you can do with your kids, no matter how old they are, whether they're 4 or 14 or 18. What can you do with your kids, all different ages? The 3 steps, very simple steps you can do to have a fairy tale summer. And I wanted to replay that workshop for you here so that you had it as well. In the show notes for this episode, you're going to find the video replay of the workshop, and you can watch it if you want, because I did use slides, and you don't need to watch them. I mean, I think I say everything that's on the slides, and I know you've got a lot to do today. And so you might need to listen to this while you're doing all the things you have on your list, moving through your day, and I think that's totally fine. So you can, if you want to, head to the show notes of this episode, and you will find the video replay of the workshop. You can also, if you are looking for Fairy Tale Summer, which is what I talk about, the program we have going this summer at RAR Premium, which is like an open and go solution to help you utilize the 3 steps that you can use no matter what. We just put them into a very simple, easy, open and go program that your kids will not forget. And you'll hear me talk about it during the workshop. But if you want to get that, all you have to do is text the word fairy tale, like it's all one word, fairy tale. Text the word fairy tale to the number 33777, and we'll send you the invitation to join us for Fairy Tale Summer. You'll go right to the page, actually, where you can get there. Or you can just go to readaloudrevival.com/fairytale. So either way. Either text the word fairy tale to 33777 or go to readaloudrevival.com/fairytale and you will be able to join us for a fairy tale summer. But even if you don't, this workshop is packed with lots of ideas for how you can have a fairy tale summer. So let's get to it. Hello, everybody. So happy to see you all popping into the chat. I am just delighted to be here with you. I can see you coming in. Tell me where you're watching from. Very curious. I've been looking forward to this all day. And that's because summer is right around the corner. And I don't know about you, but I have this tendency to do one of 2 things. I either go way too structured and like schedule my kids for a million different things, and we're camping, going on family trips and having guests over and days at the pool and one thing after another until the end of the summer comes and I feel completely exhausted, like we didn't actually get a break. Or I do the other thing, which is a little more common for me. And I don't really do much of anything. And we kind of drop our habits. We drop all of our daily structure. You know, we're like, that's really fun for the first couple of weeks of summer. It feels really good. And then things start to feel a little bit chaotic and everybody starts to behave poorly and nobody's doing their chores anymore. And everyone's on too many screens. And it just feels like totally like one side or the other, that things are going really well or really not so well. Tell me in the chat if you're prone to one or the other. Are you prone to like over structuring and over planning, or are you prone to under planning, maybe letting things get a little too free? I was talking to some ladies earlier today about this, and most of them said they actually had a tendency to go a little bit too loose. And then it feels like, oh my gosh, we've got to start back with school, right? We got to do something. Nicole says under planning. Donna says a bit of both. Karina says under planning. Gail says over planning. We've got both. Cassie says we've got a good mix here today. A good mix of some of us overplan and some of us underplan. Jesse says definitely under planning. I mean, it's tricky too, because I think it depends on the season you're in, whether or not you have like a new baby and you're just not getting very much sleep, or whether you're running teenagers around to all of their activities. Rebecca says way too much free time for all of us. I remember one year at the end of summer realizing it's time to start school when I found like faces drawn on every single one of our bananas, like elaborate faces. I was like, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time that we started doing something else. Although, I mean, that's a great way to spend your time. And I wasn't complaining. Could have been spent a lot worse ways, right? Let me tell you a little bit about my family. For those of you who are new here, I'm Sarah Mackenzie. I'm going to make this bigger so you can see my crew. My husband, Andrew, and I have been married for 23 years. We just had our 23rd anniversary on Sunday. And we've got 6 kids who we've homeschooled since the beginning. Our oldest is 22 and she's graduating from college this weekend, which is crazy, with her bachelor's in English. And she's going off to grad school next year. That's really fun, in Scotland, which is even more fun. Our second is Allison. She's a sophomore at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Georgia. Our third is that tall fella, and he is just finishing up his freshman year at Franciscan. He's studying marketing. I have been accused of a time or two of raising my own publishing company. Trying to raise my own publishing company with my oldest daughter who wants to be an editor and an illustrator and a marketer. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world if that ends up being how it goes, right? And we've got 3. We're still homeschooling our 12-year-old daughter, Clara, and then our twins, our identical twin boys, who are 10. I always feel a little dishonest with this picture, though, because you know how stressful this day was, right? Like getting everybody's outfits coordinated. I paid a lot of money for this photo. Let me show you like a real photo. This is my family for real. This was a while back, of course. The twins who are babies in this picture are now 10. So, but basically, I've done both. I've had summers of both kinds. I've had the overscheduling summer where I'd like hustle. That was last summer. I signed the kids up for just way too many activities. And I promised them weekly trips to the pool, which was the highlight actually, but it ended up just being one more thing. And at the end of this summer, I just felt like, oh my goodness, we did not get a break and I'm exhausted. Most of the time, I feel like summer kind of melts into a puddle of chaos. I also do my work at Read-Aloud Revival. Tell me in the chat if you've listened to the podcast. The Read-Aloud Revival podcast is 10 years old as of last month, which is pretty wild. It has been downloaded over 16 million times in 160 countries. And I think it's because when moms who really want more than anything else to connect with our kids, we have so much on our plate. We have so much going on. But what we really want more than anything is to spend our time doing the most important thing. And then we find out that really reading aloud is the most important thing. And it's kind of easy most of the time, not always. We can talk about it. And it's free. It's amazing. We're going to talk all about why it's so amazing in a minute. I've also written a couple of books, Teaching from Rest and the Read Aloud family. And during all this work, I've realized that we can do something better with our summers than either have extreme chaos or super structure. And based on what I'm seeing in the chat, I think it's likely we all want something that's somewhere in the middle of those two extremes, right? Something that's not one side or the other. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about something I propose here, which is just enough structure to keep our summer days from melting into chaos and just enough fun to keep our kids asking for more. And even better, if we put read alouds at the center of this plan, that's kind of in the center, that's not too structured and not too loose, I think we're going to be really happy with ourselves at the end of the summer, because reading aloud is the tippy top thing we can do with our day. It's the best 10 or 15 minutes we can spend with our day. And I'll explain why in just a minute. But really what we want to do is take these summer days we have, and we don't need to feel like, oh, we've got to squeeze all the juice out of them. We've got to get the most of our summer. I don't know if you've ever heard that. You only have 18 summers with your kids. It's not true. For one, I'm about to spend a whole summer with my 22-year-old. So I'm just saying it's not always true. And number two, that's not helpful. That does not help me enjoy my summers with my kids, to think time is running out. I am not a more pleasant mom when I'm operating from that scarcity, like time is running out. mindset. I'm not a fan. So instead, I think we don't have to feel like we need to squeeze all the juice from this summer, but we also don't need to feel like the only best summer is if we like let everything loose, because we know that's also not true. So tonight we're going to talk about 3 steps to a fairy tale summer. And honestly, we've taught this same set of steps over and over and over again at Read-Aloud Revival for years. Tens of thousands of families, in fact, have used it on our podcasts and in our programs to help their kids fall in love with books and to really start enjoying their own kids again. But I've never quite explained it in the way I'm going to explain it today. So this is going to be really fun. It's a little cheesy. I love a good cheesy metaphor, and we're going in. We're going to build a cupcake, which is really fun and kind of cheesy, like I said. And we're going to build a cupcake with 3 steps. And these 3 steps are going to walk you through the same 3 steps that we use over and over and over again at Read-Aloud Revival to help our kids fall in love with books, to help us fall in love with our homes, with our kids in our summer, and without putting more on our plate. Because I feel like that's another important piece, is that I have a tendency, and I bet some of you here tonight do as well, of thinking it'll all be solved if I just add something, but we don't actually need to add something most of the time. And we're going to talk about that too. How do we make this simpler and take things off our plate? Now, before we talk, I do want to share with you specific fairy tales that I love for all different ages. So whether you've got a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old or anything in between, or older, for an 18-year-old, anywhere, any age kids, I'll give you some read aloud recommendations for fairy tales. And we'll talk about why specifically I want to do fairy tales this summer. But before we do that, I want to take you quickly through the 3 steps. So we're going to bake a cupcake, shall we? Let's make a cupcake. Okay. The first step is to read aloud. Now, that's supposed to say read aloud. It just says read, but that's okay. Here's the deal. Often we think of reading or reading aloud as just another thing on our to-do list, right? It's another should. It's another, I should do that. I should be doing more of that, which also doesn't usually feel super great. That feeling of like, I should be doing more of that in our motherhood, right? But what I want to propose to you is that reading aloud, especially, takes more things off of your to-do list than it puts on. And it's also really foundational to this whole 3-step method, which is why it's the cupcake, because the cupcake's the most important part. You can't have a cupcake without the actual cake, right? So if you do nothing else that we talk about tonight, reading, this matters. This is like preferably reading aloud matters a lot. And let's talk about why. I'm going to make this bigger on your screen so that you can see it easier. One of the main benefits that reading aloud gives our kids is academic gains. It's the number one thing that we can do to support our kids' academic success. This is shown by studies that nothing else can hold a candle to it. Not even something like hiring a private tutor, which most of us, I think, would kind of assume that hiring a private tutor would have a bigger impact on our kids' academic success than reading aloud. No. Putting them in a private school. No. Like there's literally nothing else you can do that will help them with their future academic success more than reading aloud. Not even having them read on their own, but reading aloud. It's amazing. Also, we know that kids who read a lot or are read to a lot grow up to be kinder, more empathetic people. And this makes all the sense in the world, right? Because every time our kids read a story, they're walking a mile in the shoes of someone else. And if they walk mile after mile after mile in the shoes of someone else, they start to see the world from another point of view. It's easier for them to see someone on the street or the person who cuts them off when they're driving and they're older, or somebody who's sitting by the side of the road and know that person has a whole story. And so we start to look around ourselves and with more empathy and compassion, and our kids do too. It also gives us and our kids a special chance to grow in fortitude and virtue. The opportunity that what we're talking about here is this opportunity to bear witness to others, like others overcoming really hard circumstances. Because what happens is when you read a story, every story has the same basic framework, which is you have a character who wants or needs something, but has to face seemingly impossible obstacles to achieve them, to get what they need, to get what they want. And they actually have to become a better version of themselves as well. And so they watch this happen. They watch it happen every single story that you read. A character needs or wants something, faces seemingly impossible odds, and has to overcome those odds in order to get it and becomes a better version of themselves. You show this to your child again and again and again, and they can't help but see and bear witness to that display of virtue again and again. Okay, I saw a question in the chat that I don't want to overlook. Kirsty said she'd love to see a citation on that study that reading aloud is more beneficial than anything else. I can't remember exactly where that one came from, but it's from one of a couple places. So let me direct you to the Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease, or The Enchanted Hour by Megan Cox Gurdon, or it might be Megan Gurdon Cox. I always get her name mixed up. I think it's Megan Cox Gurdon. The Enchanted Hour and the Read Aloud Handbook are full of statistics like this and studies like this that are super helpful. We're going to talk about time, Margaret. So I'm excited to get to that in just a minute. We'll get into how much time. One more thing that I want to talk about before we move on is that reading aloud gives us a special chance to make lifelong bonds and memories with our family, right? It's a really simple, sweet way to connect, especially once your kids start getting older. It's a really quick way to get back on the same side of the fence. You can be going head to head with your kid, having a moment, but as soon as you start reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe together, you are both on the same side of the story. You're both worried about the White Witch. You're both wondering if they're going to be able to convince Edmund to make the right decision. You're both worried about Tumnus. Everybody's on the same side of the fence. And one thing I just want to point out is can you think of another single thing you can do in 10 to 15 minutes a day for free that gets you all of these benefits? It's kind of amazing. And I think this is why we get really excited about reading aloud once we start reading aloud a lot with our kids, because we see all these benefits, the academic gains, the empathy and the compassion, the fortitude and the virtue, the connection, and it's all happening in just tiny snippets of time that don't cost anything or take anything extra from us. And this is what I mean when I say reading aloud can take things off of your plate, because I can't think of another single thing that I can do as a parent that gets all of these really important things. I want my kids to be academically prepared. I want them to grow in empathy and compassion. I want them to grow in virtue and fortitude. I want them to feel connected to our family. That's a lot of things on my list to do, right? That's a lot of weight. But if reading aloud is one thing that can carry all of that, it just takes something off of my list. So we've got our foundational cupcake, reading aloud, right? We are reading aloud. And now what do we do? Well, if all you do is read aloud, you're in good shape, because that is the best 10 to 15 minutes every other day you are spending with your kids. But to even enhance that more, we can do something else that we call relate. Now, you'll notice all of my 1, 2, 3, all of my steps are going to be starting with R's, because I love alliteration. It helps me remember. We can also think of this as the frosting on our cake, because we can make our cupcake even more delicious with another step. And by relating, what we really mean is using one of the best parenting tools you have, which is conversation. Easily one of the best. Now, we don't tend not to think that this is super useful, but I think it's very likely the most useful tool that you have in your parenting toolbox. I've got 6 kids, I mentioned, right? 3 that are grown and 3 at home. And I recently texted my 3 grown kids, hey, what's something that you really loved about homeschooling? And I texted them all separately, and they all texted back to me book titles. And one of them I didn't even remember reading. I had to go back and look. And I was like, oh, we did read that. What do you know? That's kind of amazing. Out of all the things we did in our homeschool, all 3 of them mentioned an actual book, because that's the thing what they remember. The books we read, the conversations we had. The other thing that they mentioned was that we sometimes would go out to pancakes after we finished a book to talk about it. And I'll tell you in a few minutes why that particular thing stuck in all three of their minds, because there's a reason for it. There's like a scientific reason for it, which is super interesting, which I thought was really interesting when I discovered it. But when we talk with our kids about books, we communicate something in particular. We communicate a couple things, actually. We communicate, you matter to me, what you think matters, right? I have time for you. And I want to communicate all of those things to my kids. Again, thinking about reading aloud as taking something off of your list, not adding to it. If I am spending some time reading with my child, I'm communicating all of those things. You matter to me, and I have time for you. If I talk with my kids about the books that we read, I also send the message of you matter to me and I have time for you and what you think really matters. But this requires something else. It can't just be me drilling my kid on a book that we read, because that doesn't feel good. So instead, we need to ask open-ended questions. And if you imagine with me for a minute that you just finished reading a novel that you loved, and you called up your best friend or you texted your best friend and said, I finished this book. You would love it. You've got to read it. So she calls you up and she's like, okay, but before I read it or before we talk about it, I want to know, I'm going to give you this little quiz to make sure you actually read it and understood it. You would never call that friend again with a book recommendation, right? Or if you were to say, okay, if you were to show up at your book club, and let's say you're in a book club and you show up for book club night and you knock on the door and your friend opens the door and you hand her the brownies, you're like, oh, I'm so glad I'm here. And she's like, great, before you come in, we're just going to have you like write a 5-paragraph essay or take this little quiz to find out if you really read the book. You would literally never go back, right? This is not how adults read books. It's not how real readers read books. It's interesting that that's the way that we encounter books with our kids when a lot of times, right? When actually what we really want is someone to go, what did you love about it? Tell me something about it. What was something that stood out to you? An open-ended question that's not a test. Now, we'll come back to some more specific open-ended questions and how to do this in a casual, leisurely way in a minute. But for now, I want to keep building our cupcake. We are reading aloud. That's our cupcake. We are putting frosting on the cupcake. I told you it was cheesy, right? But I love it. By relating and having a conversation. And then we add sprinkles to the top of the cupcake by remembering. And we think, listen, we all want our kids to remember the good moments in childhood, right? I want my kids to remember the times that we spent like playing board games and going on family trips, reading aloud, having family dinner, hoping they don't remember all the times I lost my patience and wasn't showing up as well as I wanted to. How do we ensure that our kids remember the books we shared? So this is kind of interesting. I read a book not terribly long ago called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And it's a nonfiction book. And in their book, they're just talking about why we remember some things and don't remember others. So one of the examples they give in the book is a trip to Disneyland. So if you were to go to Disneyland and every hour they texted you and said, rate from 1 to 10 which books you loved. Not which books you loved. Wow, my brain was already skipping ahead. Rate from 1 to 10 how much fun you're having right now at Disneyland. You might have like you've just got off your favorite ride, and so you rate it like a 10 or a 9. Or you just watched, Fantasmic, and so you're like 9. That was amazing. Or then you're like in a long hot line and the baby's crying and the toddler has to pee and you're like 1. This is the worst hour of my life, right? Kids are hungry, whatever. Actually, the number that they would see most, because they did this study, the number they would see most is a 5 or a 6. Most people would rate their day about a 6. It averaged out to be about a 6. But 2 weeks later, they would ask the same people, how on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your Disneyland trip? And the people would say 9, 8. I thought, this is so interesting. How come people remember this as an 8 or a 9 when it was definitely a 5 or a 6? And what they've found is there's a couple of keys to why we remember what we remember. And there's one of them is that just the beginnings and endings. So you'll notice, like if you go to Disneyland, that when you walk into Disneyland, There's a certain experience you're having. There's like music swelling. It's very clean. You know exactly where to go. Everybody's smiling. There are employees there waving as you walk in, like, we're so glad we've been waiting for you. Same thing happens when you leave. That's because Disney knows that people remember beginnings and endings. They also remember two other things. They remember things that are sensory and things that are social. So Chip and Dan Heath in their book would say, if you want your kids, or if they're not talking about your kids, I just think about it with my kids. But if you want somebody to remember something, you want to heighten the sensory experience and the social experience. And if you amplify those two elements, that's the simplest way to help somebody remember something good. So if we want our kids to remember our reading sessions as being really good memories, then all we need to do is amplify the sensory and the social. So how do we do this? I think the easiest way to do this with sensory, amplifying sensory, is with food, because we are, again, you'll hear me say this 100 times. You do not need to add anything to your to-do list, right? Neither do I. But I'm already feeding my kids, and you probably are, approximately 4,300 times a day, right? So if we take one of the times that we're feeding our kids, not every day, just like once a week or something, and we transform it, something we're already doing. We're going to make you dinner, but now we're going to make a dinner that goes along with the book we're reading. That is transforming something you're already doing into something that is amplified sensory, and now they'll probably remember it. Now, this can be themed, like you're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so you give your kids Turkish delight, or it can just be an amplified sensory experience. For years and years, I basically just gave my kids popcorn. Popcorn while we were reading aloud. Popcorn, popcorn, popcorn. It could be very simple, does not have to be totally tied in thematically, but that's one way you can do it. We're going to get into the social in a minute. We'll come back to the social. There's a bonus step. I told you there was 3 steps to a fairy tale summer, and there is. If you just read aloud and you're talking with your kids about the books, relating, and you're adding an occasional sensory or social experience to make it fun and to make it stick in their mind, you're golden. That 3 steps, I mean, you're really golden with the first, but the 3 steps together, that's a powerhouse for turning your kids into kids who love reading and who remember your family as being like a bookish read aloud family. So everything else is just the cherry on top. I told you it was a cheesy metaphor, and I love it. I told you. And what we call these in Read-Aloud Revival are rabbit trails. During the school year, we talk about rabbit trails as being history, science, art, anything that we're music, anything we're tying in. Those are really fun. The thematic things that you can do, you know, you're reading a story set in Egypt, and so then you start reading other books about Egypt or watching a documentary. That's really fun. It's also not essential to turn your kids into readers. And in some seasons of life, we just don't have the time or bandwidth for it. It's not the stuff that lasts. So that's why it's at the top, because it's not foundational. It's just the cherry on the top. The cupcake is pretty delicious without it. If you have the time and energy for it, that's pretty great. And you can take some rabbit trails, but it's just not essential. So here is what we're going to talk about now. Fairy tales, because I mentioned that those 3 steps, reading, relating, talking about books, right? And remembering by adding a sensory component are really the heart. Those are the 3 steps. This summer, I want to read fairy tales. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that those reasons I mentioned earlier, that for why reading aloud is so impactful, the fact that it's excellent for their academic growth, that it helps them grow in empathy and compassion, that it helps them grow in fortitude and virtue, that it helps us connect. All of those, especially the fortitude and virtue one, are really enhanced with fairy tales, because fairy tales just have embedded in them the like bedrock of good and evil, the bedrock of like virtue, basically. And so fairy tales are enhanced. Another thing I've noticed in all my interviews at Read-Aloud Revival podcast and premium is I almost always ask the authors I interview, what books formed you as a child? And almost always they'll say fairy tales. I mean, I bet it's like 90% of them name a fairy tale. I think they're appealing to nearly every child, right? They offer the core of storytelling, good language, a character arc, growth in like bearing witness to fortitude. And they're also cultural staples. So they're the stories we actually want our kids to understand, right? So when they're adults and someone references like the Goldilocks effect in business, they'll know, they can probably figure out what the Goldilocks effect means. It's like not too much, not too little, just right, So it's kind of what we're doing here, actually. Not too structured, not too loose, just right. It's a Goldilocks summer. Now you can do this on your own and get everything you need. The 3 steps, like you can do this all the time in your home. You can read aloud, you can talk about it, add sensory, and that's all you need. That's why I'm telling you, it's totally free, super simple, taking stuff off your plate left and right. Don't even have to read aloud every day. You just need to do it every few days, every once in a while. But what we've done at Read-Aloud Revival is if you want to make this easier and you want to read fairy tales with us this summer, we want to invite you to join us because this summer we are having a fairy tale summer and we're using some of my very favorite fairy tales to do this exact thing where we're using the same 3 steps of read aloud, relate, and remember, plus rabbit trails when you want them, to explore some of the best fairy tales. And depending on how old your kids are, you're going to be reading different fairy tales. So I'll tell you all about those. I'm going to walk you through actually our fairy tale summer program based on those 3 steps. And then I'll tell you where you can get it after that. Okay. So we talked about how step 1 is to read aloud, right? So for fairy tale summer, we're doing that in a special way. We are reading aloud. I'm gonna just put myself up on screen again for a second. I didn't grab the other one. Let me just show you one of them here first. We are reading aloud this book. This book is Classic Fairy Tales by Scott Gustafson. And this is a gorgeous book. So I'll tell you what, it's got 10 fairy tales in it. Let me read you the ones that are in here. Oops. Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, Puss in Boots, Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Tom Thumb, Hansel and Gretel, The Frog Prince, Rumpelstiltskin, Cinderella, 3 Little Pigs. So that's 10 of them. And I'll just show you an illustration so you can see like why I love this book so much. I've read a lot of fairy tales, but this one is by far my favorite. Look at how beautiful. Let's see if I can get that without the glare. There we go. Isn't that stunning? Here's the thing. Scott Gustafson is actually a fine artist. These are all oil paintings that took years and years to create. And these are like art that you would hang on your wall. They're so beautiful. Truly like an art gallery for the lap. This is like a perfect example of how a picture book can be an art gallery for the lap. We're reading this. We're also reading the Wing Feather Saga, the first book in the Wing Feather Saga, On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. Let me show you how this is going to work in Read-Aloud Revival's A Fairy Tale Summer. Here we go. Okay, so here's what we know that. Actually, tell me in the chat how old your kids are. Or no, don't do that because that'll take you too long. Do this instead. Look at the tracks on the screen. See, there's track 1, and that's if your kids are all age 10 and under. Track 2 would be if your kids are all age 8 and older. And track 3 is if your kids span both age groups. Here's where the tracks come in. In Fairy Tale Summer, you're going to get, when you join us for a Fairy Tale Summer, you're going to get a guide that has absolutely everything. In that guide, you're going to find that everything is divided up by track to simplify you choosing what you want. We always create our resources at Read-Aloud Revival like a menu. So, you don't go to a restaurant and order everything that's on the menu, right? That would be too much. Instead, you got to pick and choose. So this is our way of helping you pick and choose. So if your kids are all 10 and under, when you get your Fairy Tale Summer Guide, you're going to look for track 1. And if you have kids that are all age 8 and older, you're going to look for track 2. And if your kids are in both groups, we're going to show you how to pick the best from track 1 and track 2 by using track 3. And you'll get this summer Fairy Tale Summer Guide. And then in there, you'll see all 3 tracks. So you can just choose which ones you want. Now, track 1, you're reading, you can see it here on the screen. Classic fairy tales, the one I just showed you. Track 2, your kids will read On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. Oh, I forgot I had slides for these. Let me show you better. Here we go. Track 1. Track 1 is if your kids are all age 10 and under. And in your guide, you're going to find track 1, and you're going to be using classic fairy tales. Now, what's going to happen actually is that I'm going to see if I can come on here so then you can't see. Well, that's okay. That way you can see me. What's going to happen is you're actually going to be reading one fairy tale from classic fairy tales each week. That's what is happening in track 1. So for the first week, you're going to read Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and we're going to take you step by step through all those steps we mentioned: read, aloud, relate, remember, rabbit trails, using Goldilocks. And then the next week, you're going to read the next one. The next week, you're going to read the next one. So that's what's on deck if you've got kids that are all age 10 and under. If you have kids that are all age 8 and older, you are definitely welcome to read classic fairy tales. This is a book you're going to want to keep on your shelf forever. But you're also going to, but really the focus for yours will be On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. Now, this is the first book in the Wing Feather Saga by Andrew Peterson. He's best known as a Christian musician. He's amazing as a musician. He's one of my favorites. He's also a phenomenal author. And this whole series, I recommend it if you love Narnia, if you love The Lord of the Rings, if you love The Green Ember, any of that kind of vibe of book. If any of those sound like up your kid's alley, they're going to love this book. I'll tell you, my 20-year-old, this was her favorite series growing up. And my 10-year-old, one of the twins, just finished reading the 4th book. So he just finished reading the whole series, and he handed it to me. It was so funny. He brings it to me and he says, "Mom, I am a changed human." I was like, I know. I mean, these books really do it to you. They're so good. So I texted Allison, our 20-year-old, and said, "Hey, Allison, Emerson just finished reading the Wing Feather Saga." And she's like, "Oh, great. 10 a.m. Saturday. We're going to talk about it." So she calls and they do this video call on Saturday, talking for like 45 minutes. She told Emerson, "Go to a room where there's nobody else because I don't want the other kids to hear the spoilers." And they just talked all things Wing Feather. And I thought that's what a book can do. It can connect your 20-year-old who's living in Georgia and your child who's in Washington State, their 10-year-old sibling, and help them spend an hour together. So cool. So anyway, this is a fabulous book. This is what you'll read with track 2. And with track 3, you're going to read, actually, you're going to get both books, and then we'll help you choose the best from both, depending on how old your kids are. We do this in the most simple, open and go way possible. So we walk you through it step by step by step. Now, here's the thing. We all know fairy tales are not just for kids, right? And at Read-Aloud Revival Premium, we are really big on nurturing our own reading lives as well. So this summer, it's not just a fairy tale summer for our kids, but we're also doing a Mama Book Club as part of Fairy Tale Summer. We're reading our own fairy tale. We're reading Sarah Arthur's brand new book, Once a Queen, which is in the spirit. You can tell, once again, another author who is profoundly influenced by Lewis and Tolkien and Madeleine L'Engle. And you can just really, see it. This is a brand new fairy tale. Really fabulous. So it's actually written for teens, but I loved it. So we're reading it as moms. And that's our fiction selection. We're also reading The 10 Habits of Happy Mothers by Dr. Meg Meeker, one of my favorite nonfiction books. Truly one of the books that's been the most formative in helping me really love my homeschooling life. I mean, my mothering life. Really love parenting. It's not for homeschoolers specifically. It's for mothers, but it's so powerful. So we're reading both of these as well. Okay, so now in our fairy tale summer, we've got reading aloud. So we know what we're reading aloud, right? Classic fairy tales, On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. How do we relate? How do we do this second part? How do we put the frosting on our cupcake? Well, in your guide, what you'll find is open-ended discussion prompts, and you'll find these for each of the books. So whether you're in track 1 and you're reading classic fairy tales, or you're in track 2 and you're reading On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, or track 3 and you're doing a little of both, you're going to find open-ended discussion prompts. Remember, we do not want questions that are like, feel like an inquisition, feel like a quiz. We want our kids to feel like real readers, and we want to discuss books with them like real readers do, right? And so we can use open-ended discussion prompts, and we'll have them right in there. So for example, when you're doing classic fairy tales for track 1 or track 3, and you're reading Rumpelstiltskin or Cinderella, you're going to open up your guide, and you're going to find open-ended questions that you can use about Rumpelstiltskin or Cinderella right there, so you don't even have to think about it. They're already done for you. Same thing with On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. Remember step 3? Sensory and social, right? That's what we're going for. Sensory, meaning we're amplifying the senses. And what we've done in our guide is we have created, we have assembled recipes for you for each week in the summer that pair with the fairy tale you're reading, either the fairy tale that's in classic fairy tales or the part of On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness that you're in. Now, we have a very strong value at Read-Aloud Revival. I've said this again a million times for not adding anything to your plate. I am not a huge fan of recipes that take like an extra trip to the store, make you get a lot of supplies, make me stand on my feet in the kitchen very long. So these are very simple recipes, but they're also recipes that are fun and that will seal the book in your child's memory as a shared experience. So for example, if you're reading Snow White and you make candy apples, well, that's pretty fun, right? So we'll have recipes for each of the fairy tales or each part of On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness in your guide for you. And then that wasn't just sensory, it was also social. And here's where it gets really fun in a fairy tale summer. We have scheduled live Zoom events based on the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness all through the summer. Here's what these look like. We've got 3 live events happening in at RER Premium's A Fairy Tale Summer. So if you join us for our Fairy Tale Summer, you will get links to meet the author, Andrew Peterson, in June. And Andrew Peterson will be there. Your kids can submit their questions and he'll answer them. So fun. It's like a backstage pass, basically, where they can ask their questions. In July, Aiden Peterson, his son, is coming because Aiden was pivotal in creating a lot of the creatures that are in the Wingfeather Saga, like Bumpy Digtoads and Fangs of Dang and Toothy Cows. And so he's going to teach a creature making workshop and help your kids create their own creatures for their own fantasy story. And then in August, Joe Sutphin is going to come and do a map making workshop because Joe made the maps that are inside Wingfeather. So he's going to teach your kids how to make their own maps for their own workshops. Super fun, right? These are all going to be live on Zoom and offered as replays so that you, even if you can't make it to the actual live events on the live event on the live date, you can watch the replay or you could start and stop and pause it as much as you'd like. What about that bonus step? We talked about the cherry on top, rabbit trails, right? Well, for our rabbit trails, in our summer guide, again, paying really close attention to wanting to make sure we're not adding anything to your to-do list, but just helping your summer have enough structure to be fun and productive and feel good. We have an indoor and an outdoor summer adventure each week for you that's also tied to your fairy tale you're reading. So if you're reading one of the classic fairy tales and you're reading Hansel and Gretel, then you might be going on a nature hike in the forest and looking for some nature scavenger hunt type things. And On the Edge of the Dark Sea and Darkness, there's going to be other activities that are tied specifically to that book. There will be an option that's indoor and outdoor because I know some of you live in Alabama and do not want to go outdoors in July. And some of you live in Wisconsin and definitely want to be outdoors in July. So regardless, you'll find an indoor and an outdoor summer adventure that is tied to that week's fairy tale as well. Again, this is all extra. This is just that cherry on the top. So you could pass this if you wanted. Super fun though. Now listen, you can absolutely read these books and do the steps. Read, relate, remember on your own. And if you just remember those, read, relate, remember, you've got your cupcake with your frosting and your sprinkles, you're in really good shape. I'm going to highly, highly recommend these books to you. Whether you do a fairy tale summer with us or not, I would highly recommend you get these books. They would make great additions to your family library. But if you want this in our open and go format with a guide that's got, weekly supply lists, everything laid out for you with your simple schedule in mind, trying to keep things really simple and enjoyable, then you want to join us for A Fairy Tale Summer. Now, this is part of RER Premium. Tell me in the chat if you're an RER Premium member and you're here. Hi. Give you a little hug. If you're part of RER Premium, you get all this already. This is what we're doing in Premium this summer. But if you're not a part of RER Premium, you can still join us for a fairy tale summer. Access to a fairy tale summer is $57, and you'll be able to sign up for just a fairy tale summer, and you'll get access to everything, which includes the fairy tale summer guide, all the links, invitations to those Zoom events, the Fairy Tale Summer Mama Book Club Guide. And I forgot to mention this. Not only will you get a Mama Book Club Guide for Once a Queen, and I think I have both of them right here. I do. Once a Queen and the 10 Habits of Happy Mothers. You'll get a guide that walks you through that. Our Mama Book Club Guide is different. I just love it so much. Really, we are super focused on helping you read for what you need, because we know that you might be in a season where you're just trying to get in the habit of reading again because you haven't been reading for your own pleasure. You might be in a season where you really want to dig in and cull the wisdom from the book and apply it to your life. Or you might just be there's a whole bunch of different things that you might be needing from your reading life. We call it read for what you need. And at the beginning of the Mama Book Club Guide, you'll find you basically pick from a list of what you need from your reading life. And then we help you read for what you need. We show you how you can do it in a way that helps you. So I kind of love it. But not only do you get the Mama Book Club Guide, we are having an evening with each of the authors. So in July, Dr. Meg Meeker is coming to spend an evening with us to talk about this book. And in August, Sarah Arthur is coming to to Fairy Tale Summer to talk about this book. So you get that as well. So you get the Fairy Tale Guide, live Zoom events, the Mama Book Club Guide and invitations to those. And that all is available to you from May 31st. The guide's available May 31st. And then you'll get to have access to it all the way through September 2nd. I'm going to put this on screen so you can access it. If you use this QR code, it will take you to where you can sign up for a Fairy Tale Summer, or you can go to this URL at the bottom of the screen. And like I said, you can sign up anytime now. If you sign up, it's $57 to get access to just Fairy Tale Summer. You'll have access all summer long to everything. You'll get access to all 3 tracks because it's all in the same guide. You just choose your track. And then you'll have access through September 2nd. Now, if you also want access to everything that's in Premium, that's actually the better deal, because you just add $10 more. You get access to our whole forum. Everything we've done in RER Premium in our archive is a huge library full of family book club guides and homeschool training and mentoring from me and all kinds of good stuff. And so that is for an additional $10. You can just get 3 months access to everything in Premium as well. We also are doing a Circle with Sarah retreat in August. And what this is Circle with Sarah is my homeschool mentoring program. Every Monday, there's a podcast that goes out to RER Premium members with a little 10-minute encouragement for your homeschool. I also have all kinds of homeschooling master classes and things inside RER Premium for homeschooling moms. In August, we do something special at Circle with Sarah, though, and we have a retreat for homeschooling moms. That's like a 2-day, this year we're doing one called Focus and Align, where we help you get really clear on what you want your homeschool to look like for the coming year. And then make sure that your actual homeschool that you're planning and that you're about to jump into is in line with that. It's really fun. It's a day and a half on Zoom. So you do it from home, and it's just really fun. We did it for the first time last year. We're doing it again this year. And if you want to join us for that Circle with Sarah retreat, you want to do the premium version of this because you want to make sure you have access to everything in RER Premium. Okay, I'm going to open up my comments so I can make sure I ask I see all your questions because I'm happy to stay and answer them. Oh, good. Donna says Circle with Sarah is the best. Hannah said, I loved last year's retreat. Excellent. Maria says one of her favorite things to do is grab a drink and sit in on the Mama's RER night. Yep, that's once a month in Premium. So great. Good. Bridget loved a retreat last year too. Excellent. So glad. Let's see. Oh, Misty says this is the best $57 you'll spend this summer. Really, here's the deal. I think at the end of the summer, you can absolutely, and I just want you to hear this very clearly. You can absolutely use that 3-step model and just find some fairy tales and read aloud and talk with your kids. But there is something really fun about doing it in community. And you could even pull in a friend and you could do it together. So you're reading, everybody's reading, you're reading Goldilocks together. And then maybe you're doing your having your treat together and doing the adventure together and then talking. It's so much fun. But you could even do it just on your own in your family. And it feels like just enough structure to keep things from really kind of going downhill over the summer. So many members are here. This is fabulous. And you're all singing the praises in the chat. That's so fun. Oh, Zara's husband read the Wing Feather series to her 7 and 9-year-olds, and they loved it. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, here is how to do it. You can go to readaloudrevival.com/fairytale. You can click do it again. You can click this, go to this QR code, sign up for a fairy tale summer. Everything is going to be available May 31st. I should mention this. You get this guide. You get Zoom invites to these events, but we have a really strong commitment to making things as easy to use as possible. We're always changing, making things better, like trying to make it a little more accessible, make it a little bit easier for you to access anything you need. So on a fairy tale summer, when you get into a fairy tale summer, I should say, the first thing it's going to guide you to do when you sign up is choose your track. And so you can get your books, and it'll show you, like, if you're in this track, you want to get these books. If you're in this track, you want to get these books. May 31st, you'll get your guide, but you'll also get access to a page where everything is, to make it super simple. Every week, you'll be able to watch this little video with your kids. I actually make it right to your kids, where I'm inviting them to look for something specific in each of the fairy tales or in each section of On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. And all those videos, your guides, your links, everything is on one blessed page. So you do not have to go hunting and pecking all over the place, trying to remember where you downloaded that thing. It's super simple and very easy to use. So you'll get access to all of that May 31st, like I said, all the way through the summer till September 2nd. Samantha asks, is there a time to do reading comprehension, or is just discussing enough? I would make a really strong argument that discussing books with your kids is far superior to reading comprehension. And here's why. When you're reading for reading comprehension, you're reading and thinking all the time, like, what question is somebody going to ask me about this? So if I'm reading a book, and let's say Once a Queen, I'm reading this, and I'm going to have a reading comprehension quiz after it. I'm paying attention to things that actually don't really matter that much. Like, where exactly, a reading comprehension quiz is how they'll say something like, where did they go after they left Paris? Or what happened after the sister fell down the hole, or something like that. Well, what's interesting about that is it's the person who's asking the question has done all the hard thinking about the book. And then the person who's answering the question is just regurgitating it, usually flipping back, looking for keywords. It's just not conducive to deep, good reading. I don't know any adults who are voracious readers who answer anything remotely close to a reading comprehension question. Instead, what we tend to do is we tend to talk about the books using open-ended questions. If your child can answer the question, in this book that we read together, let's do a fairy tale. So let's say we did the Three Little Pigs. In the Three Little Pigs, who do you think was the wisest character in that story? Well, one of your kids might say the third little pig who built his house with bricks. Another one of your kids might say the wolf. I had a kid who would definitely say the wolf. And then you can say, okay, why? Now, if they can answer a question like that, that's open-ended, they definitely have understood the book, and they're probably reading it even better. So we don't do, in our homeschool and in our family, any reading comprehension questions at all. It's all discussion-based. And I think what ends up happening is we turn kids into people who love reading and love talking about books. Okay, I am going to sign off. Thank you all so much for joining. Head to readaloudrevival.com/fairy tale to join us for a fairy tale summer. I hope you do. I cannot wait to read fairy tales with you all summer long. Thank you for coming. Well, I hope there was something in there for you. And whether you join us for a fairy tale summer or not, I hope that you read some fairy tales with your kids. Highly, highly recommend Classic Fairy Tales by Scott Gustafson. He's also got another one called Storybook Tales, I think. It's like the part 2. I'll put it in the show notes. Also worth having. And the whole Wing Feather Saga is so excellent. Start with On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. You can listen to it on audio, or you could read it. Totally life changer. It's a book your kids will not forget. So we'll put those books in the show notes. And even if you don't join us for a fairy tale summer, highly recommend those books to be read this summer with your family. I always love spending time with you. Thanks for being here. I'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode of the Read-Aloud Revival podcast. In the meantime, you know what to do. Go make meaningful and lasting connections with your kids through books.